Hello and welcome to the Scotland Singing for Health podcast, produced by Scotland Singing for Health Network. I am Brianna Robertson-Kirkland, and today I am joined by two very special guests. Before I introduce them, let me tell you a little bit about this podcast and why we are talking about singing for health. Singing for Health groups support the management of a range of conditions such as respiratory conditions, dementia, Parkinson's disease, and mental health concerns. In each episode of the podcast, we will be talking to singers, singing group leaders, researchers, and medical practitioners to find out more about the benefits of singing and what singing for health activities are taking place all around Scotland. Today, we are joined by Matthew Brown and Roseanne Gross from Scottish Opera, and they will be talking to us about the Memory Spinners project. Matthew and Roseanne, thank you so much for joining me today, and we're really excited to hear all about the Memory Spinners project. Let's just jump straight in. How did you both get started with Memory Spinners?
Matthew, will I start? I think I've been there slightly longer than you. I was absolutely in the right place at the right time. I was doing a couple of other outreach projects with the education department. I was working with our young company and some various bits and bobs. And Memory Spinners had never really needed a stage manager on board before that. So I think I was probably about year 2, possibly year 3. And we decided that we were doing a performance and they just needed somebody to come in and stage manage that last few weeks of the project. So very much right place at the right time.
And yes, I mean, a similar story in a way. I was working for Scottish Opera on their expressive arts classes, which are for young folk on a Saturday afternoon. And I'd been working on them for several years, probably getting on for 10 years. And an opening arose. They needed a new musical director for Memory Spinners. So again, I was available and asked if I'd like to take part. I'd got some background in working for music in hospitals, which I still do actually from time to time. So it was an obvious fit for me to start working on Memory Spinners with a similar demographic.
Oh, wonderful. And can you tell us a bit about Memory Spinners? Who is it for and how did it all get started?
Well, it is a project aimed at people living with dementia and memory loss. That's all aspects of dementia. Although when we first started, just before my time, it was a project that was Alzheimer's Scotland and Scottish Opera were doing as a co-production. It wasn't just aimed at people with Alzheimer's. It was aimed at anyone who had memory loss from any particular type of dementia. And there are an awful lot of them out there. So that's who we aimed it at. As I said, it was a joint production with Alzheimer's Scotland and Scottish Opera. And initially, the workshops were the weekly workshops were the big thing, and then we started developing it into a sharing at the end, so that we had something to offer friends and family, and they could see what everybody had been doing.
I think what strikes me about it as well that's slightly different from other work like music in hospitals is that from day one, the carer, who is often the partner, or it might be the son or daughter, in some cases it might be a nursing home member of staff, comes along and not only helps but engages with the project. It's very much aimed at them as much as the sufferer, which is, there's something rather lovely about that everybody in the room basically just goes, there's no labels, you just basically shed those at the door. Everybody's in the same kind of boat and we're all having fun together.
It really comes down to that term, living with dementia. I think an awful lot of people automatically assume that means a diagnosis of dementia, but living with dementia really relates to somebody with a diagnosis and their family and their community round about them. They are all living with the disease, whether they've been diagnosed with it or not. So a big part of the project was about allowing people living with dementia, no matter whether they were the person with the diagnosis or their family or friends or loved ones, to do something together that they could all enjoy and embrace.
That's really amazing and resonates with some of the other discussions that we've had in season 1. We had an episode on dementia inclusive singing, and they talked in that episode quite a lot about the social aspect of singing. So it's wonderful to hear that there are synergies with the Memory Spinners project as well. So I wonder if you could give me a little bit of insight into what does a Memory Spinners session look like or sound like?
Oh, that's a fun one. So we start off every session by eating, which is very important. And we provide some, sandwiches and little cakes and things like that. But actually, it's always been that the first half an hour, it's a 2-hour session. The first half an hour is eating, which sounds a bit ridiculous, but it's a really nice time to just come into the space. As practitioners, we can move around the space and chat to different people each week. And you sort of make those friendships as part of that half an hour before we go, now let's actually do something that's slightly more artistic. And I think we've spoken about this over the years, haven't we? And we've always thought that actually you can't get rid of that, because that's more important in some ways than anything else, just to get that sense of community. We divide the session up between different art forms, essentially. So we do some singing. Obviously, singing makes a large part of it because of the operatic element, although we don't sing that much opera, I have to say. We use bits of the opera and we rewrite bits, and we sing all sorts of other things as well that link into the theme. But there's also some art work that takes place on some of the sessions. We use the last half hour to do some artwork, which is amazing how they engage with that. And occasionally, I took my 4.5-year-old along for one of the sessions in the last block, and it's lovely seeing her engage with folk with dementia, both doing the same kind of practical artwork. We have a choreographer as well, so we do some dance. I always sort of joke that it has to have a waltz in it somewhere, every production, which is kind of true because they really enjoy just getting up and waltzing, but we also try and do some slightly more structured choreography, semi-structured. And then there's drama as well. So we have a director who leads on that. And it makes it sound like it's a show, which it isn't quite. It's more of a sharing that has these elements in it. And at no stage do people have to obviously remember anything in terms of lines and music and so on. We project any dialogue onto a big screen, and we don't have that much dialogue, to be honest. It's more about just going from section to section. So a bit of everything.
What we've always said is the sharing at the end is a wonderful thing. It's wonderful to be able to invite friends and family in and put a bit of costume on. And if the director's chosen something glamorous, we can get dressed up for a night out in long sparkly dresses. And it's a great excuse to do all of that. But the really important thing is the weekly workshops. They culminate in a sharing, but every week people come along and it's very relaxed. And Matt touched on, we always start with food. We always start with food because it means that we can all sit about and we can chat, and actually the line between who is staff and who is participants gets quite blurred, and this becomes a group of friends. But also the importance of food is the difference between somebody maybe arriving to bring a son, a mother or an aunt or somebody along to a session, and maybe discovering that they aren't actually up and organised and ready yet. And for a lot of things, it would just mean, oh, well, we can't do that now, because by the time you get ready and you've had breakfast and you've done this and you've done that, you're just not going to get out the door. So if you know you're coming to us and all you have to do is the getting ready bit and that there will be food there, then it actually makes it much easier for people to say, right, yeah, we can come along and we can commit, which is fantastic.
Oh, absolutely. Just to have that extra element where it's people don't need to worry, they don't need to be concerned, and it's also a social aspect as well. So can you tell me a little bit about what you sing?
Yes. So the way the project works is that we decide on an opera for each 8-week block. So we do one in the autumn. We've got another one running after Christmas. So for each block, we'll choose an opera as a starting point, which sometimes can be very tuneful, and you can take quite a lot from it. We've done some Gilbert and Sullivan operas over the time, Pirates of Penzance. We did Gondoliers quite recently, and you've got some really nice sort of tunes that people actually might know. Gilbert and Sullivan, maybe a bit of Offenbach, that kind of end of the repertoire. But sometimes, like this, the last block we did was The Love of Three Oranges, which Prokofiev, which does not have very singable bits in it at all. In fact, the only kind of catchy tune in there doesn't have words to it. So we did use that, but we wrote our own words. So we start with that, and then we have a couple of development days where we sort of pull it apart, literally pull it apart, and go, what's the nugget from it that we could take? Like, what's the theme, or can we tell the story? Love of Three Oranges was actually quite good for sort of kind of telling the story, because it's a bit like a pantomime and you could have fun with that. But some of the other ones, it's literally been, let's talk about, there's a lot of love in there. And, you know, that there's kind of themes. And then we build a plot very loosely around that. And from there comes the idea of songs. So we always try and include lots of things that they will be familiar with. To some degree, this last project, we kind of had the notion of laughter being so important to Love of Three Oranges, because it's all about the witch falling over and making the prince laugh is the sort of main plot point. It's a lot more bonkers than that, but that's a kind of obvious one. So we had Make Him Laugh from Sing in the Rain. I don't remember what it's from in there, which of course people, the minute you start doing that, they sing along. We sang the Laughing Police song, where they just come in with the that bit. So there's always bits like that. We do teach them stuff. So we teach them little bits of the opera that they might not know. And in that case, it's a case of just we do it every week, and by week 8 we can kind of sing it. We have 2 Scottish opera singers in most of the sessions. Certainly one is in every session, and the other one is in quite a lot of them. So it's always supported by some significant voices who can help with that. And then we just build up from there. There's folk songs from time to time. Sometimes we sing songs that the participants just start singing. I mean, I Belong to Glasgow has been in about 3 of the productions, and probably should have been in this last one, because there's a chap who literally every week got up and shared I Belong to Glasgow at the start of every session, which was lovely. It was slightly repetitive by week 8, but it was still lovely. And there was another one where it was Danny Boy. I always remember that we did a project in Airdrie. We did quite a few actually in Airdrie Town Hall. And there's a chap with the most amazing voice. He was in his late 80s, I'd say, maybe early 90s. And he just, I don't know what, he didn't work, I don't think, as a musician, but he'd obviously sung in choirs over the years, and he just launched into Danny Boy at some random points every week. And it was loud, properly loud, so we built that into our show. And we ended up doing it twice performance, because he enjoyed it so much he wanted to do it at the end. So some of it is very much led by the participants, some of it is from the opera, and some of it is built in around a theme that we take from the opera, that we try and choose things that people will at least have some familiarity with.
Oh no, excellent. And I love that idea of some of it being participant led. I wonder if you could give me a little bit of insight into the theme selection, and then how you build from there. Like, what kind of thoughts go into what's going to work and what doesn't? Like, is it an organic process?
Usually Jane Davidson, who's the head of education at the opera, usually chooses the opera as a starting point. And quite often we try and choose something that the main company has either done recently or is about to do or is doing. And some of the projects, I'm talking pre-COVID actually, we haven't done it since COVID in that way, but hopefully it will come back to that part of the process is that it would go along to one of the, I think they're called dementia-friendly performances, aren't they, Rosanne?
I think they've now rebranded as access performances, just so that they become more accessible to anybody who needs something a bit shorter and a bit more nuanced. Yeah,
I mean, they're amazing. They basically cut down the opera to about an hour tops, and they have a narrator, and they put them on in the main houses. So they would do it in Theatre Royal with the orchestra, I think. I think the orchestra is there employed to do that, and I think it's the understudies who do it for the who sing. It's their opportunity to sing a lot of the arias and what have you, but they're really nicely framed, so you basically sing a bit and then it stops and you're told the story and moves forward. So we often tried to link in with that, just because it was a nice added extra that the participants would then get to go and see that as part of the process. But from that point onwards, very organic in the sense that it was right. Here's the opera. Kind of do what you want with it. And it usually starts with three or four of us who have an initial meeting. Myself, the director of the project, Audrey Blake, and one of the singers, and Razam. And so we have an initial meeting where we just start with a blank piece of paper almost. We know what the opera is. And usually we go everywhere before we land on what it will be, if you know what I mean. I mean, I'm sure there's been times where we thought, let's do the whole ring cycle, and then no, let's pull it back. I'm trying to think that it's hard to answer the question because I can't remember, because every time we do it, it's different in the sense that we just start talking about, okay, this is a plot point, or this is something interesting. And like I say, the last one was quite narrative driven, and in so much as you can tell the story of A Love of Three Oranges, it did that. Whereas Gondoliers was more, it was just the previous one, I think, was, it was more about an Italian cafe. It became about people going to an Italian cafe on the south side of Glasgow, I think, was when we sort of made up Italian cafe. And it was very much about just people coming into the cafe and telling their story, or putting the jukebox on, and food. There's a lot of food in that one, wasn't there? Ice cream, songs about ice cream and things like that. So it really, it's very organic in that respect. And as I said before, it then changes in the process because participants are involved in some devising. This last one, we asked them to talk about things that made them laugh, and that became the lyrics for one of the songs. And they were asked to make up some little skits about laughter. So we had a bit of Tommy Cooper in there and a bit of, I can't remember who the other one was now.
Morecambe and Ernie.
Thank you, a week ago. And I've already forgotten. But Morecambe and Wise, there was,
Morecambe and Wise, that's it, yeah.
Telling a few jokes, funny dances, things like that. So we would then go, okay, that's a really nice idea. Let's incorporate that. So what we end up with on week 8 in terms of a script in inverted commas is very different than the initial document on week 1, which is fairly fleshed out, but then just changes as we go along.
Some of it's so dependent on who's come back to the group. We sometimes maybe go into development knowing that we have certain participants. We have some participants who love to get up and sing, and they would happily be up there by themselves singing. We have others previously who just desperately want us to have a good dance in there. And we have other people in the group who really want to sort of maybe sit back in the background and listen and sway and sing along and hum along. So sometimes if we're going into development knowing that we've got certain people going to be in the group, then as we start developing it, we can be going, and so-and-so would love that part. And one of the gentlemen this time, he looked fantastic in a regal robe and a crown. We went into it knowing some of the participants, and we always get some new people. So it's lovely. It's a lovely way of sort of building it up.
We had one project with an extremely good dancer who was a choreographer with the ballet, I believe, or I can't remember if it was Scottish Ballet, but one of the big ballet companies, and he came along for several projects. So we always ended up putting in a big choreographic sequence in the middle with him and Alex, who's our choreographer, and they do a big ballet duet in the middle that would sometimes last quite a long time. You sort of have to lead him back to his seat at the end, but it has that flexibility, which is lovely.
So it sounds like you have people who keep coming back for more.
Absolutely. We don't have a cut off where what you join us for one project or 1 year and then you leave. We sort of have. We find that over the years we'll maybe have some people who come year after year after year, and then they just get to a point where it's a wee bit too much, or their life has changed so much, or they've moved away. And each block, we always have new places to fill, but it's always lovely to welcome back the people who've been with us before.
Oh, amazing. It sounds like the participants are really getting a lot out of this. Have you done any evaluation on the benefits of these workshops?
We always did some evaluation with our fundraising department and the participants at the end of a block. so that people could get a wee bit of a time to see us, especially new participants, and find out what we were about, and then give us some direct feedback. We always would have somebody from fundraising come out. We normally record our sharing for the participants so that they have something, they have a keepsake at the end of it all. And what we'll do is, before we start our next block, as a bit of a social day, we'll bring everybody back in to a room, and we'll show them the DVD and sit in another excuse for tea and cake. There's always an excuse for tea and cake. But it's also a great time. Somebody from fundraising will normally join us, and they'll have a wee list of questions, and we can get a really good whole of the room. Some people prefer to take it away and fill it in themselves privately, but yeah, we do get direct feedback from the participants, which is fantastic, because especially a few years ago, it allowed us to then maybe develop a wee bit and think, right, well, that wasn't their priority. Their priority was the workshop, less than the sharing. So we need to, it just sort of helped colour our thought processes and colour how we moved things forward in the beginning, so that we actually honed a project that worked for the people who were involved in it, rather than just a lot of us sitting in Scottish Opera going, well, we have a brilliant idea. It was a project based on what the participants were looking for.
And has that, so you've said that this kind of shaped like how the project developed. Were there specific things that you changed from early on?
It has evolved, obviously, in some ways. It did start off maybe a little bit more text heavy and giving people lines, which didn't seem to work. Even folk without any dementia issues were sort of stressing out about having to deliver individual lines. So it gradually became much more a group piece, and you might occasionally have the odd moment of somebody stepping out from that, but there was no expectation of that whatsoever. And that was something that certainly shifted from my first couple of projects, which were still excellent but very different, to latterly. It was more like having a voiceover and people acting to the, if you know what I mean, like this is what happens, and then we're just going to almost do it through movement and song. I also remember, Azam, we did do some sessions with, now I'm going to get this wrong, I think it was Dementia Scotland, but it might have been Alzheimer's Scotland, as in training sessions.
Training sessions, yeah. Alzheimer's Scotland have been really supportive through the whole thing. Even now, although we're not specifically linked to Alzheimer's Scotland, they're always there when we're recruiting. We always go back to them. They're always keen to pass people on to us and speak to anybody who's come to them who they think would be. They come to every sharing. Somebody from Alzheimer's Scotland comes to every sharing and thoroughly enjoys it, and leaves saying, "Are you going to have any places next time? Is there going to be room for more people?" So we still keep that very close link with Alzheimer's Scotland. I'm laughing. I've just come across. I knew I had a wee bit about feedback, and I'm laughing because the thing that's at the top of the feedback is more egg mayonnaise sandwiches, please. And I think that's really funny because it's really interesting. Egg mayonnaise seems to be the thing that nobody makes at home. So when they come to us, they love an egg mayonnaise sandwich. A couple of other wee things where maybe people have fed back on specific operas that they would like a chance to stage, where we have been able to say, right, yeah, we will do that. Different things, maybe people have come to us and said, well, it starts too late for me, or it starts too early, and we've sort of looked at our timings a wee bit. We used to do our sharing over 2 days, where we would come in one afternoon, and again, there was always food, but we would come in and eat, and then we would do a rehearsal with a band. We would introduce a band to the piece for the sharing, and then they would go away and come back the next day in their costume, and we would do a dress rehearsal and a performance. And I know a lot of people found that 2 days, although it was exhilarating for many, you maybe found that somebody could only come for the performance day because it was going to be too much to do the 2 days. So we actually now, partly to do with COVID and partly from the feedback, we now do our sharing on our last week in the normal session times, and we just extend the day by an extra hour to allow for friends and family to come in. But I think there was always a buzz at the sharing. But I don't know, Matt, if you'd agree. There just seems to be far more of a buzz these days when they come in on that last day, and it's all happening there and then.
It also used to be on a different day, the sharing, because it was the sort of we'd be doing weekly sessions on a Monday, and then we'd suddenly do a Thursday, Friday for the last 2 sessions, for which people have routines. So we would find that people couldn't come. Not everybody anyway. Whereas now, because it's the regular time, everybody can come usually, most weeks, not every week, but most weeks. And it just builds. And we just bring in the band on the last, we have a kind of band call before that, but we just bring them into the last session. And actually that gives that last session such a big lift anyway, because suddenly you've got a little band. And then the friends and family just come in at the end of the session. And it used to be longer as well, didn't it? We used to have a meal in between it, and actually people got quite tired. So I think just doing it with this model where you just rehearse it, have a little 15-minute breather, and then perform it works better, and everybody's away by 4:30, 5 o'clock, and before people are getting tired.
Funnily enough, they're all away by 4:30 after a small reception at the end with some cake and some soft drinks. There is, in case you've missed that theme, we always feed at the end of the sharing as well.
Because we're now in the same space throughout as well, that's helped. And that was a COVID decision. We used to rehearse in the rehearsal room, the education room at the opera, which is, it's not tiny, but it was a smaller space, and it wasn't big enough post-COVID to start back in. And then we'd move into the big rehearsal room for the sharing, whereas now we're in St Columba's Church throughout. So there's that familiarity as you walk through the door going, oh, I know where I am, and I know where my seat is, which I think is better as well.
It is, and actually when you're saying St Columba's Church, because it's the same in St Andrews, we're in the same church hall in St Andrews, and although we tend to do our last sharing in June in the Byre Theatre, we do our first couple of sharings, the one in autumn and the one in spring, we do in the church hall. Again, it's that we've had a chance to work with everybody in that space, so it seems to really work well. I was just going to say another bit of feedback that we really did act on quite early on was we kept hearing from people that it was such a shame we only did the project once a year. We did it once a year in Glasgow, once a year in Edinburgh, and people really, we would get to the end of that 8 weeks and there was a real dip, and people were desperate for more and asked us for more. So it was fantastic because we did act quite quickly on that, and we took it to 2 blocks a year in each of our venues, and it would be an autumn and a sort of spring into sort of May, June time, which was lovely. By the time you then gave it another month and invited everybody back for their DVD showing and to give them the dates for the next block, we'd go away and have their summer holidays and be coming back again. So it was always, felt as though we were ticking on, and we were always seeing people and they were seeing us, which felt lovely.
So it sounds like always an appetite for more.
Definitely always an appetite for more. That's just us. Whether the participants want it, no, that's just us. No, it is. People, unless we've just finished a block there last week, and it's fine coming into December and Christmas and everything like that will take everybody's time. But then come the new year, people are desperate to be back doing something, and it's lovely to be able to say that we will be there in the new year ready for you.
How do you think the workshop impact those who take part?
I mean, it's definitely, hugely positive. You can see the anecdotal evidence of it having a benefit to health is massive. So whether the absolute medical research behind that backs it up or not, what you do see is an improvement of ability, and in many areas from week to week. So by week 8, everybody is singing and dancing and just acting more confidently than on week 1. So which in some ways is surprising. I mean, obviously you have other folk around the folk with dementia, but the folk with dementia also seem to have got that improvement over the 8 weeks. When you think there is 6.5-day gap between the sessions for it to all sort of fade away, but it doesn't seem to entirely, and it definitely, there's a knock on. So you feel it improving week on week on week. And I think one of the things that just from the very last project, actually, one of the comments that came out was it was really nice to come away and do something with mum, was what one of the participants said, rather than, for mum, or in some other contexts with mum. There was that kind of sense of it's kind of a level playing field. The lady in question was quite a good singer and obviously had quite an artistic background. I think the son in question had very little artistic background. And so they kind of were approaching it in a similar way. And he, in fact, it was the chap with the two sons who came along that alternated. They were both there on the last week, and I just said, it was just so nice to be able to do something with my mum that meant something, that kind of had that benefit for us all. And I think the other ones, less so in the last less since COVID, I suppose, but pre-COVID, we often had a lot of grandchildren coming in, either into sessions sometimes, if they could get time off school, or they were very young, like my kids, they could come in. But and I think we had one block where 2 boys got time off primary school to come every week with Granny. And again, that kind of working together and cross-generational.
I remember those 2 boys very much, and actually their grandfather had said what was so amazing about it was the boys were young enough that they had never known their gran without dementia, and they came in, they had permission to join the project for a block and come out of school every week and take part in the whole thing. And the family said they had just never really seen their gran joyful and singing and happy and smiling so much. They only saw her in the house or doing small family things, and the family were just delighted that it was invaluable what the boys being able to come along gave to them, and memories about a gran that they had never really known prior to dementia.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the sense of a safe space as well, where you've got everybody who comes into the room knows that everybody else is going through the same thing or very similar things. And I think that's another real positive impact of that project, in that you're in this space for 2 hours where everybody understands whatever that comment means, it might be just everybody understands why you're so fatigued all the time, but it might be, they understand the challenges of just living and going through day to day. And for those 2 hours, it's a chance to relax. And so there's actually a really positive impact for the carer as well as for the sufferer, I feel.
You've just said that you just finished a block, but what are the future plans for Memory Spinners?
Well, the immediate future, we will be back at the end of January in Glasgow and in Fife with another block. That will take us into the spring for another 8 weeks. So that is there, with the team all having had their emails through, trying to sort out times to start our development for those. So that's definitely happening. Scottish Opera and the Education Department, it's one of the really important projects that they work on. Community engagement is such a big thing with the department, and we've been doing an awful lot with health and well-being, more so obviously now with long COVID and things like that. But Memory Spinners is just such a big part of our core at the moment, and it has such a positive impact on people living with dementia and the people round about them and their whole communities. So we certainly are looking to keep it running.
Excellent. And how do people sign up for Memory Spinners?
Well, if you go to our website and our join in, if you just Google Scottish Opera Memory Spinners, it'll take you straight to it. But if you go onto our website and you go to the join in page, we're on there, and you have the phone number for the company and the dates of our blocks in Glasgow and in Fife. Alzheimer's Scotland we are very active at pointing people in our direction. You don't need to be a singer. You don't need to have any background in theatre. It's been quite interesting. I think our Glasgow group especially, because of how we first started, an awful lot of the participants had no background in theatre, no background in opera, came along a little bit wary of what they were going to get and realised it's just a really good fun afternoon. So we get a mixture. We get a group of people who love theatre and have gone all their lives. And we get people who have never done anything with theatre, and a key worker or a friend has just said to them, listen, I've heard about this. Do you fancy giving it a go? So we will get referrals from medical practices and places, but come to our website, have a look, and if you fancy it, just get in touch with us.
And we will have links to all of those details in our show notes below. So just pop below and you'll be able to see the links for Scottish Opera and Alzheimer's Scotland. So thank you so much, Matthew and Roseanne. I just have a final question for you both, which is there anything you'd like to add that we haven't mentioned already?
I mean, I think one nice element that I touched on is the fact that we do get some musicians in from for the last few weeks or last couple of weeks, and they always seem to come away enriched by that experience as well, which is nice. So it's not just about coming in and playing your instrument well, which they do remarkably well, but they come in and go, this is lovely. And it's nice that it can have that crossover.
Yeah, it's just an absolutely joyous, wonderful thing to take part in, whatever's brought you there.
That's a lovely message to end on. So thank you so much for you both. Next week, we are joined by Claire McBrien from Giving It Laldy, who'll be talking to us about how Giving It Laldy use singing to support the health and well-being of their local community. Thanks for listening. This podcast is produced by Scotland's Singing for Health Network, a project hosted at the Royal Conservatoire of Scotland, funded by the Royal Society of Edinburgh, and in partnership with the University of Edinburgh. For more information on our activities, please visit our website. Details are in the show notes. Someone